He dreamed of reuniting with his mother, but all he found were traces of the woman she once was. His wife smiled, controlling everything, while the elderly woman pleaded for someone to listen. Faced with her silenced pain, he woke up and swore he would never again ignore the one who gave him life. If this story caught your attention, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and let us know what city you're watching from. Let's continue. A light June rain was falling over New York City when Robert Miller passed through the automatic gate of his mansion on the Upper East Side. It was almost 7 in the evening, and the city was already lighting up. But here, in this privileged corner of the metropolis, the silence was nearly absolute. The driver had left the suitcases in the garage and headed to the back house where the staff quarters were located. Robert waved off any help. He wanted to go in alone, to surprise his wife, Patricia, and most importantly, to hug his mother. He had been away for 3 weeks, 3 intense weeks closing a corporate merger in Miami that could triple his construction company's revenue. 3 weeks, away from home, sleeping little, negotiating a lot, feeling that constant weight in his chest that only being away from his family could cause. But now, he was back, 2 days ahead of schedule. In his hands, he held a blue Tiffany box with a pearl necklace for Patricia, and in the inner pocket of his suit jacket, a handwritten letter he had written to his mother during a red-eye flight over the Atlantic. Robert Miller was 42, his hair already graying at the temples, with the broad shoulders of a man who had carried responsibilities from a young age, and a gaze that shifted between business-like determination and a quiet melancholy few ever saw. He had built an empire in the civil construction sector, erecting skyscrapers all over Manhattan, but none of it filled him with as much pride as providing a comfortable life for his mother after his father's death 5 years ago. Mrs. Eleanor, 73 years old, a woman who had once been an elementary school teacher, who had taught generations of children to read and write in a public school in Queens, who had raised Robert alone after being widowed young, who sewed at night to pay for her son's private school tuition, and who never ever complained about life. When her husband, Mr. Gerald, passed away from heart complications, something in Mrs. Eleanor dimmed. She became quieter, more introspective, but she still maintained that sharp lucidity and that sweet way of treating people. Robert pushed open the main door and stepped into the marble foyer. The crystal chandelier hung from the high ceiling, reflecting the soft light from the sconces. Everything was impeccable, as always. Patricia was obsessed with order and cleanliness. The house smelled of white lilies, her favorite flowers, which stood in enormous porcelain vases in the corners of the living room. But something was different. A heavy, dense silence that wasn't just the absence of sound, but the presence of an emptiness. Robert set his briefcase on the floor and walked through the living room. The Italian leather sofas were perfectly aligned, the throw pillows symmetrical. The interior design magazines on the coffee table were stacked with millimeter precision. Nothing was out of place, yet everything felt strange. Where was everyone? Where was Maria, the housekeeper who had been with them for 15 years? Where was Patricia and his mother? He climbed the marble staircase, his footsteps echoing through the empty mansion. He went straight to the master bedroom on the 2nd floor. The door was ajar. He went in. The bed was made, the pillows fluffed, but there was no sign of Patricia. Her walk-in closet was open, and a few clothes were scattered on the armchair as if she had left in a hurry. Robert frowned. Patricia never left clothes lying around. He returned to the hallway and stopped in front of his mother's room. He knocked lightly on the door. Silence. He turned the knob and opened it. The room was empty, the bed made, the curtains drawn. A stuffy smell hung in the air as if the room hadn't been aired out in days. Robert felt a knot in his stomach. Something wasn't right. He went back downstairs, faster this time, and headed to the kitchen. Empty. The dining room. Empty. The home office. Empty. It was then that he remembered the annex, the old wing of the mansion, the part that had been the original house before the renovations and expansions. That's where Mrs. Eleanor kept her personal belongings, her memories, her old books, the family photos, the vinyl records that had belonged to Mr. Gerald. Robert walked down the hallway, connecting the new part of the house to the old. The door to the annex was closed, but not locked. He opened it slowly and went down the 3 steps that led to a narrower corridor. The wooden floorboards creaked under his feet. There was a faint light at the end of the hall, coming from one of the rooms. He moved forward, his heart beating faster now, a bad feeling growing in his chest. And then he saw her. Mrs. Eleanor was sitting on the floor of a small room, huddled against the wall. Her white hair, usually tied in an elegant bun, was loose and disheveled. She wore an old stained bathrobe, and her feet were bare despite the cold. Scattered around her on the old floorboards were remnants. Torn letters, mutilated photos, some with the faces ripped out, books with crumpled pages, some with burnt edges, a vinyl record broken in half. And there she was, in the middle of it all, with a lost look in her eyes, staring at some invisible point on the wall. Robert stood frozen in the doorway. For a moment he couldn't process what he was seeing. That wasn't his mother. That broken, diminished, lost woman couldn't be the same one who had raised him, who had always been so strong, so lucid, so present. Patricia appeared then, emerging from another room in the annex. She was wearing a flawless white dress, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her nails manicured. When she saw Robert, her eyes widened in genuine surprise. "Robert, you're back," she said, placing a hand on her chest. "My God, you scared me. I wasn't expecting you today." He didn't answer. He could only stare at his mother on the floor. "What happened here, Patricia? What's going on?" Patricia moved closer to him, placing a hand on his arm with that gentle touch she always used when she wanted to calm him. Her voice was sweet, almost motherly. "Honey, I just found her like this too. I was looking all over the house because I didn't see her in her room and ended up here. I think she got confused. You know how she's been lately. She must have come down by herself and couldn't get back. See? She destroyed all of this own memories." Robert pulled away from Patricia's touch and approached his mother. He knelt beside her, taking her cold hands. "Mum, it's me. It's Robert. I'm here." Mrs. Eleanor turned her head slowly. Her eyes met her son's, and for a brief moment, there seemed to be a flicker of recognition. Her lips moved as if she wanted to say something, but no sound came out. She just squeezed his hands tightly, with a surprising strength for someone so frail. "Let's get you out of here, Mom. Let's take you somewhere warm to your bed." He helped her to her feet. Mrs. Eleanor was trembling, not from the cold, but from something deeper. Robert wrapped his arms around her and carried her as if she were a child. She weighed so little. When had she become so light? Patricia followed behind them, talking the whole time. "I'm going to call Dr. Mendez. He needs to see this. Honey, I've been trying to take care of her, but it's getting harder and harder. She has these episodes. She gets aggressive sometimes. Just yesterday she threw a glass of water at one of the nurses. I don't know what to do anymore." Robert didn't reply. He carried his mother up the stairs, through the entire house and into her room. He laid her gently on the bed, covered her with the thick comforter, and stroked her hair. Mrs. Eleanor was looking at him intently now, and there was something in her gaze he couldn't decipher. It wasn't confusion, it was something else, fear, a plea. "I'll get her some hot tea," Patricia said, leaving the room. When they were alone, Robert held his mother's hand. "Mum, what happened? Tell me, please." Her mouth opened again. He saw her lips form words, but nothing came out but a whisper so faint he couldn't understand it. She squeezed his hand hard, her eyes filling with tears. But then Patricia returned with a steaming cup, and the moment was lost. Mrs. Eleanor let go of her son's hand and turned her face to the side, closing her eyes. Patricia handed the cup to Robert. "Chamomile with lemon balm. It'll help her sleep." She took her phone from her dress pocket. "I'm calling Dr. Mendez now. He needs to come tonight." Dr. Mendez arrived an hour later. He was a man in his 50s, thin, with square glasses and an impeccable white coat. Robert didn't know him well. He had only been the family doctor for 6 months, ever since their old general practitioner, Dr. Peterson, had retired and moved to Rhinebeck. Patricia had found Dr. Mendez through a friend's recommendation, and he had started making regular house calls to monitor Mrs. Eleanor's health. The doctor examined the elderly woman in silence. He checked her blood pressure, looked at her pupils, and asked a few simple questions that she didn't answer. Then he asked to speak with Robert and Patricia in the hallway. "Look, Mr. Miller, I've been monitoring your mother for some time, and unfortunately her condition has worsened. She's showing clear signs of progressive cognitive decline. It could be Alzheimer's, it could be vascular dementia. We'd need more complex tests to confirm, but the fact is she no longer has the same capacity for judgment. You saw today's episode. She destroyed objects that were important to her. She can't communicate properly. She seems lost in time and space." Patricia nodded, her eyes welling up. "It's been so hard, Doctor. I try to do everything for her, but she doesn't cooperate. She gets agitated, refuses her medication. Sometimes she even looks at me with anger." Dr. Mendez nodded as if he expected to hear this. "It's common. In these cases, the ideal is to keep the patient in a calm environment with little external stimulation and ensure she takes her medication correctly. I'm going to adjust her doses. I'll increase the sedative at night to help her sleep better and add a mood stabilizer for the daytime. She needs rest, Mrs. Miller. No visitors, no excessive activity. The quieter the environment, the better for her." Robert listened to all of this with a strange feeling. It made sense, but at the same time it didn't. His mother had always been so lucid. Of course, he had noticed she was quieter in recent months, more withdrawn, but he had attributed it to prolonged grief over his father's death. And now this. Where had it come from so quickly? "Doctor," he asked, his voice a bit hoarse, "is this reversible? Is there a treatment?" The doctor sighed. "Look, I'll be honest. In these cases we can stabilize it, slow it down a bit, but reversing it is difficult. The important thing now is to ensure her quality of life, comfort and safety. And you two need to prepare yourselves psychologically. It will get worse. She will require increasingly intensive care." Robert felt the floor drop out from under him. Patricia held his arm, offering support. "I'll take care of everything, honey. You trust me, don't you? I'll make sure your mother gets the best possible treatment. I'll coordinate the nurses, the medications, everything. You already have so much stress with work. Leave it to me." He looked at her. Patricia was beautiful, blonde, tall, elegant, always impeccable. They had married 3 years ago in a grand ceremony at the E Plaza. She was 15 years younger than him, came from a traditional family from upstate New York, and had worked in public relations before the wedding. After they married, she quit her job and dedicated herself fully to the house, social events, and, recently, to caring for Mrs. Eleanor. Robert wanted to trust her. He needed to trust her. He was exhausted. Work consumed his energy. The trips were constant. The pressure for results was immense. He had neither the time nor the energy to deal with doctors, nurses, and medications. If Patricia was offering to handle everything, why not accept? "Okay," he finally said, "but I want to be involved. I want to be kept in the loop on everything. My mother is the most important person in my life." Patricia smiled, giving him a soft kiss on the cheek. "Of course, honey. We'll do everything together." Dr. Mendez said his goodbyes, leaving a new prescription and some written recommendations. Patricia walked him to the door, and Robert went back to his mother's room. She was lying down, her eyes closed, but he knew she wasn't asleep. He sat on the edge of the bed and took her hand. Again. "Mum, I'm going to take care of you. I promise you're going to be okay." Mrs. Eleanor slowly opened her eyes. She looked at him with that intensity she always had when she wanted to say something important. Her lips moved, and this time he could hear it, even if it was just a thread of a voice. "Careful." Robert frowned. "Careful? Careful of what, Mom?" But she had already closed her eyes again, and her breathing became slower, deeper. In a few minutes, she was asleep. Robert stayed there for a few more moments, watching her. Something was wrong. He felt it in his gut. But what was it? The doctor had given a clear diagnosis. Patricia was proving to be dedicated. Everything seemed to be under control. So why wouldn't this feeling of unease leave him? He stood up slowly and left the room, closing the door carefully. In the hallway, he ran into Maria, the housekeeper. She was a woman in her 60s, short, with grey hair tied in a ponytail, her face lined by time, but with lively, attentive eyes. She had worked in the house since before Robert got married, since the days when it was just him and Mrs. Eleanor living there. "Good evening, Mr. Miller. Welcome back," she said with a discreet smile, but there was something in her expression that seemed worried. "Good evening, Maria. How are you?" "I'm well, sir. And you?" "Tired. These trips kill me. And now this with my mother." Maria lowered her voice as if afraid of being overheard. "Mr. Miller, can I say something?" "Of course." She hesitated, biting her lip. "It's about Mrs. Eleanor. I'm worried about her." "Worried how?" The housekeeper glanced around, checking if they were alone. "Look, I don't want to cause trouble, but I don't think she's as confused as they say. The other day she asked me to read a poem to her, a poem by Robert Frost, and then she recited other verses from memory, perfectly, without missing a word. Can a person with a failing mind do that?" Robert was silent, processing the information. "And there's more," Maria continued. "I see when they bring her medications. It's a lot of medicine, Mr. Miller. A lot. To sleep, to wake up, to stay calm. Sometimes I think it's too much medicine." Patricia appeared at the end of the hallway. "Maria, dear, could you go prepare dinner? Robert must be starving after his trip." The housekeeper lowered her head. "Yes, Mrs. Miller." She walked away quickly, casting one last look at Robert. Patricia approached her husband, wrapping her arms around his waist. "What a day, right? But now you're home. Let's have dinner, some wine, and relax. You deserve it." Robert hugged her back, but his mind was elsewhere. He thought of his mother huddled on the floor of the annex. He thought of the doctor's words, he thought of what Maria had said, and he thought of that single whisper he had managed to hear. "Careful." That night, Robert barely slept. He tossed and turned in bed, Patricia sleeping peacefully beside him. Around 3 in the morning, he gave up. He got up, put on a robe, and went down to the kitchen. He made a strong coffee and sat at the table, looking out the window at the dark garden. New York City never truly slept. Even in this quiet neighborhood, you could hear the constant hum of the city in the distance. He thought about everything he had built, the company, the fortune, this absurd mansion. For what? For whom? His father always said that money couldn't buy happiness, but it could buy dignity. It could buy the chance to live without fear of tomorrow. And Robert had given that to his mother, or at least he thought he had. But now, seeing her like that, diminished, silenced, he wondered if he hadn't failed. If all that success wasn't just a way to distance himself, to outsource her care, to hand over the responsibility to other people. He took a long sip of coffee and closed his eyes. Tomorrow he would talk calmly with the doctor. He would request every possible test. He would investigate every detail. He wasn't going to leave his mother alone in this. But as he made these plans, a small voice inside him whispered that maybe it was already too late, that maybe, while he was busy conquering the world, something very precious had been taken from him, and he hadn't even noticed. The following days were strange. Robert tried to establish a routine of getting closer to his mother, but he always ran into obstacles. When he went to her room in the morning, a nurse would be administering medication and would say that Mrs. Eleanor needed to rest. When he tried to visit her in the afternoon, he'd find she was sleeping or undergoing some procedure. At night, when he finally managed to sit by her bed, she seemed so drugged, so distant, that she could barely keep her eyes open. Patricia explained everything with that soft, rational voice. "It's the treatment, honey. Dr. Mendez adjusted her meds. She needs time to adapt. She'll get better soon." But she wasn't getting better. Each day, Mrs. Eleanor seemed more faded. Her eyes, which once shone with intelligence and warmth, were now dull, glazed over. She barely spoke. When she did, it was disconnected sounds, single words that didn't form sentences. And Robert wondered if this was really the inevitable cognitive decline, or if something else was happening. One Thursday morning, he cancelled all his meetings and decided to spend the day at home. He wanted to observe. He wanted to understand what was really going on. Patricia seemed surprised when he announced at breakfast that he wasn't going to the office. "Not today, honey. But didn't you have that meeting with the Japanese investors?" "I rescheduled. I want to stay here, with my mother." Patricia took a sip of orange juice, her lips leaving a perfect pink lipstick mark on the glass. "Oh, that's so sweet. She'll love having you around. But you should know, she has several sessions today. The physical therapist is coming at 10, the speech therapist at noon, and the nurse needs to change some dressings this afternoon. Maybe it's better if you go to work and come back early. You'll catch her when she's more rested, at the end of the day." "No, I'm staying." Patricia shrugged, but Robert noticed a slight tightening in her smile. "All right, whatever you prefer." At 9:30 in the morning, Robert went up to his mother's room. He knocked lightly and entered. Mrs. Eleanor was sitting in the armchair by the window, looking out at the garden. She was wearing a white hospital-style nightgown, far too large for her frail body, and her hair was down, falling unkempt over her shoulders. When she heard him enter, she turned her head. For an instant, her eyes lit up. Robert felt his heart ache. It was her. His mother was in there, inside that fragile body, in that imposed silence. "Good morning, Mum." He approached and knelt beside the armchair. He took her hands, which were cold despite the morning warmth. Mrs. Eleanor looked at him intently, and her lips trembled, as if she wanted to speak but couldn't. Robert saw tears forming in the corners of her eyes. "Mum, I'm here. You can talk to me. What do you want to tell me?" She opened her mouth, made a visible effort, and finally managed to form a word. "Son." The voice was hoarse, weak, but it was her voice. The voice that had soothed him as a child scolded him. As a teenager, advised him as an adult. "I'm here, Mom. Talk." Mrs. Eleanor closed her eyes tightly, and another word came out. "Help." Robert felt a lump in his throat. "Help? Help with what, Mom? I am helping you. You're getting the best treatment." She shook her head, a barely perceptible but definitive movement. "No." And she squeezed his hands with a strength he didn't expect. Just then, the door opened, and a woman walked in. She was young, no more than 30, blonde, with a folder under her arm. She wore business attire and smiled professionally. "Good morning. Mr. Miller, I'm Dr. Marina, the speech therapist. I'm here for Mrs. Eleanor's session." Robert stood up, annoyed. "But it's only 9:30. Wasn't the session at noon?" The young woman checked a schedule on her phone. "It's marked here for 10, but I arrived a little early. I can start now if it's not an inconvenience." Patricia appeared behind the speech therapist, smiling. "Honey, let Dr. Marina work. You can visit your mother later." Robert looked at Mrs. Eleanor. She was staring at him with those pleading eyes, tears now streaming down her wrinkled face. He wanted to stay. He wanted to send everyone away and just sit there with her, in silence, just being a son and a mother. But Patricia was already guiding him out of the room, her hand firm on his arm. "Let the professionals work, honey. It's for her own good." And the door closed. Robert stood there in the hallway, listening to the muffled sound of voices from the other side. He felt powerless, useless. This was his mother. This was his house. But somehow, he had no control over anything. He went down to his office and tried to work, but he couldn't. Concentrate. He kept thinking about the word his mother had said. Help. Help with what? With the illness? With the loneliness? Or with something he wasn't seeing? At lunchtime, he asked Maria to take a tray up to Mrs. Eleanor's room. He wanted to go with her, to have lunch with his mother, but Patricia intercepted him on the stairs. "Honey, she's already eaten. The nurse gave her her food at 11:30. You know she needs to stick to a regular schedule." Robert frowned. 11:30? But that's so early. "It's what the doctor recommended. That way she has time to digest before her afternoon medication." He didn't argue. He went downstairs and ate alone in the dining room, Patricia sitting across from him, talking about trivial matters. The club's renovation, the charity tea next week, the new collection at Saks. Robert heard none of it. He was only thinking of his mother, locked in that room, being medicated, being isolated. In the afternoon, while he was in his office answering emails, he heard raised voices coming from the kitchen. He got up and went to check. It was Maria arguing with Patricia. "Mrs. Miller, with all due respect, but you're firing Joanna. She's worked here for 5 years. Why?" Patricia maintained her calm tone, but there was a coldness in her eyes. "Joanna didn't follow the proper instructions while caring for Mrs. Eleanor. She left her alone when she was supposed to be supervising. I can't accept that kind of negligence." "But it was only for 5 minutes she went to the bathroom. And in those 5 minutes, anything could have happened. Maria, dear, I know you're loyal to this family, but I need you to trust my decisions. I'm doing what's best for everyone." It was then that Maria noticed Robert standing in the kitchen doorway. She immediately lowered her head, returning to the stove where she was preparing dinner. Patricia turned to her husband, the smile returning to her face. "Honey, sorry, did you hear that? Just some staff adjustments, nothing important." "You're firing Joanna?" "Yes, she wasn't suitable for the job. I've already hired another nurse. More experienced, more qualified. She starts tomorrow." Robert nodded slowly. Did it make sense? Maybe. But something about the situation bothered him. Joanna was a nice, attentive young woman. His mother liked her, and now she was being replaced. Just like that, overnight. That evening, after dinner, Robert waited for Patricia to go up to their room and then went to the kitchen where Maria was still washing dishes. She was alone. Seeing him, she wiped her hands on her apron. "Mr. Miller." "Maria," he said, lowering his voice. "What's going on here?" The housekeeper hesitated. She glanced at the door, checking if anyone was around. "Mr. Miller, I don't know if I should say this, but I'm worried. Very worried." "Tell me." She took a deep breath. "Joanna didn't do anything wrong. She just questioned the amount of medication Mrs. Eleanor was taking. She said it seemed like too much sedative, and then the next day Mrs. Miller made up this story about negligence and fired her." Robert felt a chill run down his spine. "And that's not all," Maria continued. "There are other things. Yesterday I saw Mrs. Miller with some papers in her hand, trying to get Mrs. Eleanor to sign them. They were documents, official things. Mrs. Eleanor refused, pushed the pen away, and Mrs. Miller got angry, very angry. She said some things I'd rather not repeat." "What kind of documents?" "I don't know, sir. I couldn't see clearly, but they were important documents, you could tell." Robert ran a hand through his hair, his heart racing. "Anything else?" Maria bit her lip. "Mr. Miller, your mother isn't as confused as they say. I know it. The other day, when I was changing the sheets in her room, she looked me right in the eye and said, clear as day, no stuttering, no confusion at all. She said, 'Maria, help me. Don't leave me alone with her.'" With her. Patricia. Robert felt his legs go weak. He had to lean on the kitchen counter. "Maria, why? Didn't you tell me this before?" The housekeeper looked down, ashamed. "I was scared, sir. Mrs. Miller runs this house now. Anyone who crosses her gets fired, like Joanna. And I need this job, Mr. Miller. I'm a widow. I have 2 grandchildren to raise. But I can't stand to see Mrs. Eleanor like this anymore. She was always so good to me, treated me like family all these years." Robert placed a hand on the housekeeper's shoulder. "You did the right thing by telling me. And don't worry. No one is going to fire you, I promise." He left the kitchen, his head spinning. He went up the stairs past the room he shared with Patricia and went straight to his mother's room. He didn't knock. He just opened the door and went in. Mrs. Eleanor was lying down, but she was awake. Her eyes were fixed on the ceiling. A new nurse was sitting in a chair in the corner, scrolling on her phone. When she saw Robert, she stood up quickly. "Good evening, sir." "You can leave. I want to be alone with my mother." The nurse hesitated. "But Mrs. Miller asked me to stay the whole time." "I'm asking you to leave. Now." The woman obeyed, leaving and closing the door behind her. Robert approached the bed and sat on the edge. He took his mother's hand. She turned her face to him, and he saw not confusion, but clarity. Absolute clarity. "Mum," he whispered, "I need you to be honest with me. What is happening here?" Mrs. Eleanor squeezed his hand. Her lips moved, and this time, perhaps because no one else was around, perhaps because she felt she would finally be heard, she spoke. Her voice was weak, but the words were clear. "She wants to take me out of your life." Robert felt the air leave his lungs. "What?" "The woman you love wants to erase me. She wants my house, my assets, my place by your side, and she wants me to disappear." "Mom, don't say that. Patricia is taking care of you." Mrs. Eleanor let out a bitter, humorless laugh. "Taking care of me? Son, she's killing me slowly. The medication makes me drowsy, confused. I can't think straight. I can't defend myself. She brought me papers to sign, property transfers, powers of attorney. I refused. And you know what she did? She increased the dose of the sedatives, told the doctor I was getting aggressive." Robert shook his head, wanting to deny it, wanting to believe it was delirium, paranoia, a symptom of the disease. But there was something in his mother's voice, in the firmness of her gaze, that made him hesitate. "And there's more," Mrs. Eleanor continued. "She's already spoken to lawyers. I overheard her on the phone. She was in the garden, thinking I was asleep, but I was awake, by the window. She was talking about having me declared incompetent, about sending me to a clinic, about making sure I never come back to this house." Robert stood up, running his hands over his face. No, this can't be happening. "Son, look at me." He looked, and he saw the woman who had raised him, who had worked 2 jobs to give him an education, who had stood by him through every failure, every victory. This was not a mad woman. This was his mother. "Do you believe me?" Robert was silent. He wanted to believe. But believing meant accepting that the woman he had married, the woman who slept beside him every night, was a predator. It meant accepting that he had been deceived, manipulated, blinded by beauty and the appearance of care. The door opened suddenly. Patricia entered, still wearing the white dress from dinner. Her face showed surprise, but something else too, something Robert had never seen before, a calculated coldness. "Honey, what are you doing in here? The nurse told me you sent her out." "I wanted to talk to my mother." Patricia approached, her heels clicking on the wooden floor. "But you know she's not supposed to be stimulated at night. Dr. Mendez was very clear about that." "She talked to me perfectly lucid." Patricia let out a soft, almost condescending laugh. "Honey, she has these moments, but it doesn't mean anything. Tomorrow she won't even remember this conversation. That's how it works." Robert looked at his wife. Really looked. For the first time in a long time, he saw beyond the beauty, beyond the perfect smile, beyond the gentle voice. And he didn't like what he saw. "Patricia, what documents did you ask my mother to sign?" Her expression didn't change, but there was a brief flicker of something in her eyes. "Nothing important, honey, just updating some powers of attorney, administrative things, to make it easier to manage her assets in case she becomes more debilitated." "And why didn't you consult me first?" "Because you're always busy, Robert. Always traveling, always in meetings. I'm just trying to lighten your load, to take care of the things you don't have time for." "I have time to take care of my mother," Patricia sighed, as if dealing with a stubborn child. "Of course you do, but you need to accept that she's sick, that the things she says don't make sense, and that I'm doing all of this for you because I love you and I want to see you happy." Robert looked back at his mother. Mrs. Eleanor was watching him in silence, waiting. He saw a plea in those tired eyes, a plea to be believed, to be saved. But fear is a powerful thing, and so is doubt. Robert couldn't just ignore 3 years of marriage, couldn't accept that it had all been a lie. Not yet. "All right," he said finally. "We'll talk about this tomorrow. Right now I just want my mother to rest." Patricia smiled, victorious. "Of course, honey, I'll call the nurse back in." Itay left the room, and Robert stayed a moment longer with his mother. Mrs. Eleanor held his hand tightly. "Son, please, you're my only hope." He kissed her forehead. "I'll find out the truth, Mom. I promise." But when he left the room, he found Patricia waiting in the hallway. She hugged him, resting her head on his chest. "I know this is hard, honey. I know it hurts to see your mother like this. But we'll get through it together, okay? I'm here. I'll always be here." Robert hugged her back, but he felt no comfort. only a chill. That night, lying next to Patricia, he couldn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling, listening to her soft breathing, and wondered who the woman he had married really was. He wondered if his mother was right. He wondered what he should do. And for the first time in his adult life, Robert Miller felt completely lost. Robert spent the next few days in a state of constant alert. For the first time in years, he couldn't focus on work. He rescheduled important meetings, delegated decisions he would normally make himself, and spent most of his time at home watching Patricia, watching the nurses, watching every move around his mother. He had learned to pretend. He kissed Patricia in the morning, complimented the dinner she coordinated, smiled when she talked about her social engagements. But inside he was calculating, piecing things together, trying to see what he had been blind to for so long. It was on a Monday morning that he decided to act. Patricia had left early for a charity luncheon at the New York Athletic Club. It would be a long event. She wouldn't be back before 4 in the afternoon. Robert waited for her to leave, watched her car disappear through the gate, and then went straight to her office, an elegant room on the second floor that Patricia had decorated with French furniture and expensive art. He had never entered it without permission. He had always respected her privacy, just as she respected his, or so he thought. Now, looking at that closed door, Robert wondered how many secrets lay behind it. He turned the knob. Locked. Of course it would be. He went back to their bedroom, rummaged through Patricia's drawers until he found a set of keys. He returned to the office and tried each one until finally the lock gave way. The room was impeccable, like everything Patricia touched. The polished mahogany desk, the books aligned on the shelves, the silk curtains gathered symmetrically. But Robert wasn't interested in decor. He went straight to the desk drawers. The first contained only stationery, business cards, envelopes, stamps. The second, fashion magazines and jewelry catalogues, but the third was locked. Robert used a smaller key from the set and managed to open it. Inside were folders, several folders organized by color. He took the first one, blue, and opened it. They were real estate, documents, deeds to properties that belonged to his mother, an apartment on Park Avenue, a house in Rhinebeck, a plot of land in Westchester County, and on all of them were transfer agreements, already filled out, just waiting for signatures. Robert felt his blood run cold. He grabbed the second folder, green, powers of attorney, documents that would give Patricia total control over Mrs. Eleanor's finances and assets. And in the third folder, red, he found something even worse, medical reports. But they weren't from Dr. Mendez. They were from a psychiatrist named Dr. Arnold Bennett, a specialist in having, the elderly declared, incompetent. The reports described Mrs. Eleanor as a patient with advanced dementia, incapable of managing her own assets, and a danger to herself and others. But there was something strange about the dates. The reports were from 3 months ago, but the psychiatrist claimed to have had multiple consultations with Mrs. Eleanor. Robert knew this was a lie. His mother had never seen any psychiatrist. He would have been informed. He kept digging and found more. Receipts for payments to lawyers specializing in family and inheritance law, a draft of a marital separation agreement with clauses that guaranteed Patricia half of his assets and lifetime alimony, and a handwritten note in Patricia's delicate script that simply said, St. Teresa Clinic, Greenwich, Connecticut, permanent admission, $40,000 a month. Robert had to lean on the desk. His head was spinning. It was all real. His mother was right. Patricia wasn't taking care of her. She was systematically building a case to have her declared incompetent, take her assets, remove her permanently, and eventually divorce him with a hefty financial settlement. He took photos of all the documents with his phone, put the folders back exactly as they were, locked the drawer, closed the office, and went back to his own office, locking himself inside. He needed to think. He needed a plan. If he confronted Patricia now, she would deny everything, turn the situation around, make him seem crazy or controlling. He needed more proof. He needed witnesses. He needed to protect his mother. He called his personal lawyer, Henry Tavares, a trusted man who had worked with him for 15 years. He scheduled an urgent meeting for the next day at a discreet cafe far from his office. He couldn't risk Patricia finding out. In the afternoon, when she returned from the charity luncheon, Robert was in the living room reading the newspaper, feigning normalcy. Patricia came in, excited, talking non-stop about the event, the friends she saw, the club's wonderful decorations. He smiled, made appropriate comments, and when she went upstairs to change, he took a deep breath, trying to control the rage boiling inside him. That night there was a dinner, an important corporate event, an awards ceremony for the construction industry, where Robert was being honored. He didn't want to go, he wanted to stay home, close to his mother, but he couldn't cancel, without raising suspicion. So he put on his tuxedo, helped Patricia fasten her diamond necklace, and they went together to the unique hotel where the event was being held. The ballroom was packed. Businessmen, investors, politicians, all in black tie, champagne flutes in hand, professional smiles on their faces. Robert circulated through the party, greeting acquaintances, accepting congratulations, but his mind was far away. It was with his mother, in that cold room, drugged with medication, a prisoner in her own home. It was during dinner, between the main course and dessert, that everything changed. Robert was sitting at the head table next to Patricia when a man approached. It was Charles E. Matthews, a real estate developer, an old family acquaintance, a man in his 60s, with white hair, gold-rimmed glasses, and a deep voice. "Robert, my friend, congratulations on the award, well deserved." "Thanks, Charles." The man hesitated, as if he wanted to say something but didn't know how. "Look, I didn't want to bother you on a night like this, but something's been bothering me for a while." "It's about your mother." Robert felt his entire body tense up. "My mother? What about her?" Charles lowered his voice. "I received a letter from her, about 3 weeks ago, handwritten, very lucid, very clear. She said she was being held in emotional imprisonment, that she needed help. I didn't know what to do. I thought about calling you, but I figured it might be an exaggeration. You know how the elderly can sometimes get confused. But that letter, Robert, she seemed very aware of what she was writing." Robert could barely breathe. "Do you still have that letter?" "I do. I kept it. It's been bothering me. It just seems strange." "Can you send me a picture of it now, please?" Charles took out his phone, scrolled through his gallery, and showed the screen to Robert. It was a photo of a handwritten letter in his mother's shaky but legible handwriting. "Dear Charles, I am writing this letter because I have no one else to turn to. My son is being deceived. I am being held prisoner in my own home, medicated against my will, prevented from leaving or speaking to anyone. His wife wants my assets. She wants to push me away. She wants to erase me. Please, if you can, help me. If you can't, at least show this to Robert. He needs to know the truth. Eleanor Miller." Robert read and reread those words. The handwriting was his mother's, there was no doubt, and it was perfectly coherent. No confusion, no delirium. She knew exactly what was happening. "Can you send this to me?" he asked, his voice choked with emotion. Charles nodded. "Of course. And Robert, if you need anything, I'm here. I've always had a great deal of respect for Mrs. Eleanor. If she's going through something bad, I want to help." Robert thanked him and returned to the table. Patricia looked at him curiously. "Who was that?" "Charles Matthews. He was just congratulating me." She smiled and went back to talking to the woman beside her. She had no idea what had just happened. She didn't know that in that moment, her mask was beginning to crack. Robert couldn't stay until the end of the event. He made an excuse about feeling unwell, asked Patricia to stay and enjoy the party, and left alone. But he didn't go home. He went to his office. Even though it was almost midnight, he needed to be alone, he needed to think. He sat in his leather chair, turned on only the desk lamp, and sat there in the dim light looking out at the illuminated city through the window. New York never stopped. Even at this hour there were lights, there was movement, there was life. But he felt dead inside. How had he been so blind? How had he not seen what was happening right under his nose? His mother had been screaming for help, and he hadn't heard her. Because he was busy. Because he trusted Patricia. Because he wanted to believe he had found a partner, a companion, someone who truly loved him. But Patricia had never loved him. She loved what he represented, the money, the status, the life of luxury, and when she realized there was even more money in Mrs. Eleanor's assets, she decided to go after that too. It was that simple, that cold. Robert spent the entire night there, planning. When the sun rose, he knew what he had to do. The next morning, he went straight home. Patricia was still asleep. The event had ended late. He went up to his mother's room and found the new nurse, the one Patricia had hired, organizing the medications. "You can leave," he said. "I need to be alone with my mother." "But Mrs. Miller said that—" "I own this house. Leave." The woman obeyed. Robert locked the door from the inside and approached the bed. Mrs. Eleanor was awake, watching him. Her eyes were still a bit glazed from the medication, but there was lucidity there. "Mum," he said, holding her hand, "I believe you, and I'm going to get you out of this. But I need your help." Mrs. Eleanor squeezed his hand. "Tell me, son, the letter you sent to Charles Matthews, did you write others?" She nodded. 3. One for him, one for your cousin Margaret, and one for Maria, asking her to keep it in case she needed proof. "Maria has this letter?" Another nod. Robert felt a spark of hope. "Mum, do you remember everything that's happened in the last few months? Can you tell me?" And she told him. In a weak but steady voice, Mrs. Eleanor recounted how Patricia had gradually taken control, how she started by replacing loyal staff with people she hired herself, how she increased medication doses without consulting doctors, how she brought fake reports, papers to sign veiled threats, how she had locked her in the annex that day, trying to force her to sign property transfer documents, and destroyed the family photos and letters to erase proof of her lucidity. She told me that if I didn't cooperate, she would send me to a psychiatric clinic, that you would never see me again, that I would die alone, forgotten. Robert felt tears burn his eyes. "That will never happen, Mom. Never." He spent the rest of the morning with her. He asked her to write everything down in a notebook, all the dates, all the events, all the details, and she did, her handwriting shaky but consistent, page after page of testimony. When she finished, Robert took the notebook. Then he went to the kitchen where he found Maria. "The letter my mother gave you, do you still have it?" The housekeeper took him to her room in the back of the house and from inside a drawer pulled out a yellowed envelope. Robert opened it and read it. It was practically identical to the one sent to Charles Matthews. "Can I keep this?" "You can, Mr. Miller. I saved it because I knew one day you'd need it." That afternoon, Robert met with his lawyer, Henry Tavares, at a discreet cafe in the West Village. He showed him all the photos of the documents, the letters, the notebook with his mother's notes. The lawyer reviewed everything in silence, his face growing more and more grim. "Robert, this is extremely serious. We're talking about false imprisonment, embezzlement, fraud. Your wife could be criminally prosecuted." "I don't want to prosecute her," Robert said. "I just want her out of my life and my mother's life forever." The lawyer nodded. "We'll prepare everything. But you need to be careful. As long as she's in the house, your mother is at risk. If Patricia suspects you found out, she might try to accelerate her plan. What do you suggest? Confront her, tonight, with all of this in hand, and make it very clear that if she doesn't leave voluntarily, you will go to the police. I have contacts in the DA's office. We can make this a case very quickly. She's smart. She'll know when she's lost." Robert returned home late that afternoon. Patricia was in the living room drinking tea, flipping through a magazine. When she saw him, she smiled. "Honey, where have you been? I tried calling you. We need to talk." She sensed his tone. She closed the magazine, set down her cup. Did something happen? Robert placed a folder on the coffee table. He opened it. Inside were copies of all the documents he had found. Patricia turned pale. "What is this? Did you go through my things?" "Yes, and I found a lot of interesting things. Fake medical reports, fraudulent powers of attorney, receipts from lawyers, drafts of a separation agreement and letters from my mother begging for help. Patricia stood up, trying to maintain her composure. Robert, you don't understand. I was trying to protect you, to protect your mother. These are normal procedures for cases of dementia. My mother doesn't have dementia. She's lucid, and you know it. You were deliberately medicating her to keep her confused so you could steal from her, so you could manipulate me. Patricia let out a nervous laugh. That's ridiculous. You're believing the fantasies of a senile old woman? They are not fantasies. I have proof. I have the letters she wrote. I have the notebook with her notes. I have witnesses, and I have you. On record with fraudulent documents. Patricia's smile vanished. Her eyes turned cold, calculating. What do you want? I want you to leave this house. Tonight. Now. And never come back. And if I don't? Robert stepped closer to her, looking her in the eyes. I will go to the police. I will report you for false imprisonment, for embezzlement, for document forgery. You will go to jail, Patricia. And when you get out, if you get out, you will have nothing left. Not my money, not my mother's money, not your reputation. Patricia stared at him for a long moment. Robert saw the hatred there, pure and distilled, but he also saw the calculation. She was weighing her options, and realizing she had lost. Finally she nodded. Fine, I'll leave, but I'm taking what's mine. You can take your clothes, your personal jewelry, nothing else. She gave a bitter smile. You're going to regret this, Robert. The only thing I regret is marrying you. Patricia went upstairs and Robert heard her footsteps in the bedroom, opening closets, dragging suitcases. An hour later she came down. She had 2 large suitcases and a handbag. She looked perfect, as always. Flawless makeup. Styled hair, elegant clothes. As if she were leaving for a vacation, not being thrown out in disgrace. You're a weak man, Robert. You always were. And she said, pointing to the ceiling, to the floor above where Mrs. Eleanor was, is just a useless old woman who's holding you back? Robert didn't answer. He just opened the door. Patricia left without looking back, and when the door closed, Robert felt as if an immense weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He took a deep breath, leaned against the wall, and for the first time in weeks he cried. The days following Patricia's departure were like watching a rebirth. Robert dismissed all the nurses she had hired and called back Joanna, the employee who had been unjustly fired. He also brought in a new doctor, Dr. Peterson, the one who had always cared for the family and had retired to Rhinebeck. When the man heard what had happened, he agreed to come back immediately, even if just for a few weeks, to reverse the damage. The first thing Dr. Peterson did was review all of Mrs. Eleanor's medication. Sitting in the living room with Robert, he shook his head in disbelief as he examined the pill bottles. Robert, this is an outrage. Your mother was on insane doses of benzodiazepines, antipsychotics, sedatives. For a 73-year-old woman, this is practically inducing a chemical coma. Anyone under these conditions would be confused, apathetic, and uncoordinated. So she never had dementia. The doctor sighed. Look, I can't say for certain without more detailed tests, but my professional guess is no. Eleanor has always been a lucid, intelligent woman. What she had was depression after your father's death, yes, and depression in the elderly can manifest with symptoms that look cognitive. But what I see here is someone being intentionally sedated to appear incompetent. Robert felt the anger return, but he took a deep breath. Anger was useless now. Action was what mattered. What do we do? We're going to wean her off these medications gradually. It can't be all at once, or she could have withdrawal symptoms. But in 2 or 3 weeks she should be clean, and then we'll see the real Eleanor coming back. And that's exactly what happened. For the first few days, Mrs. Eleanor still slept a lot, was still confused, but slowly, like fog dissipating in the sun, she began to emerge. Her eyes became less glazed. Her speech became clearer, her movements more coordinated, and the memories which had seemed lost started to return. Robert spent hours by her side. He read to her, talked with her, showed her old photos, and she responded, first with monosyllables, then with sentences, then with complete stories. She told him about when he was a child and fell off his bike, breaking his arm, about when he won the scholarship to study business at NYU, about when he met Patricia and she, Mrs. Eleanor, tried to warn him that something was wrong but he wouldn't listen. "You tried to warn me?" Mrs. Eleanor smiled sadly. "I tried, but you were in love, or thought you were, and I was just the overprotective mother. You told me I needed to trust your choices." Robert lowered his head. "I'm sorry, Mom, for not listening to you." She took his hand. "Son, the important thing is that you listen to me now, when it really mattered. You saved me." Maria was a crucial ally in those days. She prepared nutritious meals for Mrs. Eleanor, took short walks with her in the garden, and they talked about the old days. And with each passing day, the elderly woman grew stronger, more present. Joanna, the returning nurse, was also intensely dedicated. She helped with physical therapy exercises, monitored her blood pressure and glucose, and treated Mrs. Eleanor not as an incapable patient, but as a dignified lady who deserved respect. One day, 2 weeks after Patricia left, Robert came down for breakfast and found his mother already sitting at the table. She was dressed in a simple but elegant outfit, her white hair tied in a bun, a touch of makeup on. Her face, she was smiling. "Good morning, son. I thought it was time I started having breakfast with the family again." Robert felt his eyes burn. He sat beside her and took her hand. "Good morning, Mom. You look beautiful." They had breakfast together, talking about trivial things. The weather, the news in the paper, the plans for the day. It was simple, it was ordinary. But to Robert it was the most precious thing in the world, because it was real, because it was theirs. But there was still a shadow, the mansion, that huge, cold place, full of bad memories. Robert no longer felt at home there. Every room reminded him of Patricia, of the deceit, of the terrible days his mother had suffered. One evening after dinner, he talked to Mrs. Eleanor about it. "Mom, I was thinking, what if we sold this house, bought something smaller, cozier, a place that was really ours?" Mrs. Eleanor looked at him with those wise eyes. "Would you like that?" "I would. This place was never a home. It was a stage, a showcase. I want something simpler, more genuine." She nodded. "Then let's sell it. But on one condition. I want to help choose the new house. I want to be part of the decisions." Robert smiled. "Of course, Mom, we'll do everything together." They put the mansion on the market. It was a valuable property in a prime neighborhood, and it didn't take long for interested buyers to appear. Within a month, they closed a deal with an Arab businessman who wanted an imposing property to host business meetings. Meanwhile, Robert and Mrs. Eleanor went house hunting. They visited several options: modern apartments near the financial district, huge houses in gated communities. But nothing felt right. It was Mrs. Eleanor who found it, a townhouse in the West Village on a quiet, tree-lined street. It wasn't large. It had 3 bedrooms, a spacious living room with a fireplace, a large kitchen, and a backyard garden with fruit trees and a small vegetable patch. It had a front porch, perfect for a rocking chair and some plants. When Robert saw the place, he understood why his mother had fallen in love with it. It wasn't about ostentation. It was about comfort. It was the kind of house where you could sit on the porch with a coffee and watch the neighbors walk by, where you could plant tomatoes and basil in the garden, where you could simply live. "This is it," he said. "This is where we'll start over." The move happened on a sunny Saturday in September. Robert hired a small, reliable company. Maria, who stayed with them, coordinated everything. They only took the essentials from the mansion: clothes, books, some furniture, objects of sentimental value. The rest was donated or sold. Robert wanted a fresh start. Mrs. Eleanor, despite her age and recent frailty, insisted on being part of everything. She helped choose where the furniture would go, what colors to paint the walls, where to plant each seedling in the garden. She was being reborn not just physically, but emotionally. The first dinner in the new house was simple. Maria made a roast chicken with potatoes, a green salad, and a caramel flan for dessert. They ate in the kitchen informally, talking and laughing. Robert looked around and thought he had never been so happy. But the peace wouldn't last untested. 3 months after the separation, Patricia filed a lawsuit against Robert. She claimed she was entitled to half of the couple's assets, including a share of the company, the properties, and lifetime alimony. Her lawyers argued that she had dedicated years of her life to the marriage and deserved to be compensated. Robert's lawyer, Henry Tavares, got straight to the point at the first hearing. He presented all the evidence, the photos of the fraudulent documents, Mrs. Eleanor's letters begging for help, the report from Dr. Peterson attesting to the forced chemical sedation, the testimonies of Maria and Joanna, and most importantly, the notebook with the elderly woman's detailed notes about everything she had suffered. The judge, a middle-aged woman named Frances Simmons, reviewed everything in silence. Then she looked at Patricia and her lawyers with a stern expression. "Are you aware that this evidence constitutes serious crimes? False imprisonment, embezzlement, document forgery. If Mr. Miller decides to press criminal charges, you could face prison time." One of Patricia's lawyers tried to intervene. "Your Honor, these accusations are baseless. Our client was simply caring for an elderly woman with dementia." The judge cut him off. "Counselor, I have read the medical report from Dr. Peterson. I have read the witness testimonies, and I have read the petition your own client initiated to have Mrs. Eleanor declared incompetent, based on reports from a psychiatrist who I see here never even consulted the patient. This is not care. This is systematic abuse." Patricia turned pale. Robert, sitting on the other side of the room, watched her. She no longer looked so confident, so perfect. She looked small, exposed, defeated. The judge continued, "I am summarily dismissing this petition. There is no legal basis for any financial compensation when the end of the marriage was caused by the illicit conduct of one of the parties. And I will go further. I am forwarding this case file to the District Attorney's Office for criminal review. You may leave." Patricia left the courtroom without looking at Robert. Her lawyers followed, heads bowed. It was over. She would get no money, no power, no victory. Robert should have felt satisfaction, but he only felt relief. He just wanted that chapter to be closed for good. In the following months, life settled into a new routine. Robert drastically reduced his work hours. He delegated more responsibilities, hired a reliable COO, and started going to the office only 3 times a week. The rest of the time, he dedicated to his mother, to himself, to rediscovering who he was outside the world of business. He and Mrs. Eleanor developed rituals. Every morning they had coffee together on the porch. She would read the newspaper aloud, and they would discuss the news. In the afternoons, they would walk through the neighborhood, her arm linked with his, stopping to greet neighbors, to pet passing dogs, to observe the trees and birds. Mrs. Eleanor started cooking again. Not every day. Maria still handled most of the meals, but on special occasions. A cornbread on Sunday, a shepherd's pie when Robert returned from a trip. Small gestures that brought back her autonomy, her identity. She also started reading again. She devoured novels, poetry, biographies. Her mind, which had been so clouded by medication, now shone again. Robert often found her in the living room armchair, glasses on her nose, a thick book in her hands, completely engrossed. One day she showed him a new notebook. It was different from the one where she had documented the abuse. This one was colorful, with a floral cover. "What's this, Mum?" She smiled. "I'm writing. I'm not sure what yet. Memories, maybe, or just reflections. Things I've learned. Things I want to remember. Can I read it?" "One day, when it's ready." Robert realized his mother was rebuilding herself, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually. She was healing from the wounds Patricia had left, but also from older wounds. The loss of her husband, the loneliness, the feeling of uselessness that old age sometimes imposes. Maria, ever observant, commented one afternoon while preparing tea. "Mr. Miller, Mrs. Eleanor is different, lighter, happier than I've seen her in years," Robert agreed. "She is, and so am I." And it was true, he was different too, less stressed, less obsessed with work and money. He had learned that success wasn't measured in zeros in a bank account, but in moments of peace, in shared laughter, in holding hands. One afternoon in April, almost a year after Patricia's departure, Robert came home to find his mother in the backyard garden. She was kneeling beside a flower bed planting pansy seedlings. She wore a straw hat to protect herself from the sun and gardening gloves. There was dirt on her hands and clothes, but her face was radiant. He approached slowly, not wanting to interrupt, but she sensed him and turned, smiling. "Son, come see. I got these seedlings to sprout. I thought they wouldn't make it, but look at them." Robert crouched beside her and looked at the small, colorful flowers, delicate but resilient. "They're beautiful, Mom." Mrs. Eleanor took off her gloves and wiped her sweaty forehead with the back of her hand. "You know, son, I was thinking about everything that happened, about Patricia, the medication, those horrible days." Robert felt a tightness in his chest. "Mom, you don't have to talk about it if you don't want to." She shook her head. "No, I need to because I understood something I never had. A problem with getting old. I was never afraid of slowing down, of having limitations, of needing help. What was killing me, what was truly destroying me, was not being heard. It was being treated as if I didn't exist anymore, as if my words had no value, as if I were just an object to be managed." Robert felt tears in his eyes. "I'm sorry, Mum, for not listening to you sooner." Mrs. Eleanor held her son's face in her hands, now gloveless, still smudged with dirt. "Son, you listened when it mattered. You saved me. And more than that, you started seeing me again, seeing me as a person. And that's what makes me happy now. It's not the new house, not the flowers, not anything material. It's knowing that you're here, present, listening to me." They hugged there, in the middle of the garden, among the flowers and the earth. And Robert understood that this was the real new beginning. Not the sale of the mansion, not the end of the marriage, but this moment, this hug, this connection. The following weeks were peaceful. The routine continued, simple and happy. Mrs. Eleanor tended her garden, read her books, wrote in her notebook. Robert worked as much as necessary and spent the rest of his time at home. Maria cared for them all with affection, and Joanna made weekly visits just to check on Mrs. Eleanor's health, which was now impeccable. One Sunday morning, Robert woke up early and went to the kitchen to make coffee. When he looked out the window, he saw his mother already in the garden, watering the flowers. The sun was still low, the golden morning light illuminating her face, and she was humming an old song, something Mr. Gerald used to hum, too. Robert got 2 cups of coffee and went out to the garden. He handed one to his mother. "Good morning, Mum." "Good morning, son. You're up early." "Couldn't sleep. I keep thinking about how much life has changed." Mrs. Eleanor took a sip of coffee and looked at the flowers she had planted. "It has changed. But you know, son, sometimes we have to go through the worst to appreciate the best. Those terrible months taught me something important." "What's that?" "That dignity isn't something someone can take from you. They can drug you, isolate you, silence you, but deep inside, where no one can reach, you still exist. And as long as you exist there, there's hope." Robert nodded, moved. "You're the strongest person I know, Mom." She smiled, that smile full of love and wisdom. "I'm not strong, son. I'm just someone who didn't give up. And I was lucky to have a son who, in the end, listened to me." They stood there, side by side, drinking coffee, watching the garden awaken with the morning sun. And Robert thought that he didn't need anything else. He didn't need mansions, imported cars, or dinners at 5-star hotels. He had what truly mattered. He had his mother back, he had peace, he had love, and that was everything. A few weeks later, a new caregiver arrived to help on the days Joanna wasn't available. She was a young woman named Renata, a nursing student, friendly and attentive. On her first day, she watched Mrs. Eleanor tending to the flowers and commented admiringly, "You have a beautiful garden, Mrs. Eleanor." The elderly woman smiled, watering a bed of red geraniums. "Thank you, dear. I enjoy taking care of them. It does me good." "Have you always enjoyed gardening?" Mrs. Eleanor paused, thoughtful. "You know, I've always liked plants, but I never really had the time to tend a garden. I spent my whole life taking care of other things. My husband, my son, my students when I was a teacher. And after my husband passed, I was so lost, so trapped in grief and loneliness, that I saw no beauty in anything. And when I went to live with my son in his mansion, well, that never felt like my place. Until all that happened. All that? Mrs. Eleanor looked at the young woman and saw a genuine sincerity in her. She decided to tell her. It's a long story, dear, but the short version is that I went through some very difficult times. I was mistreated, silenced, almost destroyed, but my son saved me, and now I'm here, in this small but loving home, tending my garden. You're very strong. Mrs. Eleanor shook her head, watering the last of the flowers. It's not strength, Renata. It's resilience. It's waking up every day and choosing to keep going, and believing that your voice still matters, that your existence still has value. And does it? She smiled. It always did. I just needed to be reminded of it. Renata was silent, absorbing those words. Then she said softly, You're an inspiration. Mrs. Eleanor shrugged. I'm just an old woman who didn't give up. That afternoon, Robert returned from a quick meeting at the office and found his mother on the front porch sitting in the rocking chair, a book in her lap. But her eyes were closed, her face turned toward the sun. He sat on the steps beside her. Tired, Mom. She opened her eyes and smiled. No, just appreciating. Sometimes we forget to just stop and appreciate a moment, don't we? It's true. Mrs. Eleanor looked at her son with affection. You know, Robert, I wanted to thank you. Thank me? For what? For giving me a second chance, for listening to me when I needed it most, for choosing to stand by my side. Robert felt a lump in his throat. Mum, you're my priority. You always were. I was just too stupid to realize it. She shook her head. You weren't stupid. You were human. And humans make mistakes. The important thing is that you corrected it in time. They sat there in a comfortable silence until Maria called them for dinner. The table was set in the small but cozy dining room with a checkered tablecloth, lit candles, and the delicious smell of a beef stew. It was simple, but it was perfect. During dinner, Mrs. Eleanor told old stories about when Robert was little and insisted on sleeping with the family dog in his bed, about when he wrote an essay in school about his mother and won first place in the city's literary contest, about when they were poor but happy, living in a small apartment in Queens, sharing dreams and hopes. Robert listened to it all, laughing, emotional, treasuring each memory like a jewel. He realized now how much he had lost by distancing himself, by prioritizing money and status over moments like this. After dinner, he helped his mother up to her room. She was tired but content. He helped her into bed, covered her with the comforter, and kissed her forehead. Good night, Mom. Good night, son. I love you. I love you too. He turned off the light and was leaving when he heard her voice, soft in the darkness. Robert? Yes, Mom? Thank you for giving me a real home. He couldn't answer. He just closed the door slowly and stood there in the hallway for a long moment, letting the tears fall in silence. The days continued like this. Simple, peaceful, filled with small joys. And Mrs. Eleanor flourished. Not just physically, though her health was better than it had been in years, but especially in spirit. She had returned to who she had always been, a wise, kind, strong woman who had much to give to the world. Robert had changed too. He had lost the hardness that years of ruthless business had created. He smiled, easily again, was moved by simple things, and valued what truly mattered. And the mansion? It became just a distant memory. Someone once commented that Robert had lost a lot in the divorce, that Patricia had gotten part of the fortune, but he just smiled and said that, in fact, he had gained everything. He had gained peace, he had gained truth, he had gained his mother back. On a beautiful spring morning, almost 2 years after the whole ordeal, Robert woke to the sound of birds singing. He went downstairs and found his mother already in the garden, as always. She wore a floral dress, a straw hat, and gardening gloves. She was watering the flowers carefully, talking to them as if they were friends. He approached with a cup of coffee in his hands and just watched. His mother seemed so at peace, so whole. It was hard to believe this was the same woman he had found huddled on the floor of that cold room, surrounded by wreckage. Renata, the caregiver, arrived then for her morning shift. "Good morning, Mrs. Eleanor." "Good morning, dear. Can I help with anything?" Mrs. Eleanor paused, leaning on the watering. You know, Renata, you once asked me if I ever had a problem with aging, and I said no, but I don't think I was completely clear." The young woman moved closer, curious. "How so?" Mrs. Eleanor looked at the flowers, at the garden she had created with her own hands. "I never had a problem with getting old. I know my body isn't what it used to be, that I need help with some things, that there are limitations, and that's okay. It's part of life. The problem was never aging. The problem was not being heard. It was feeling like my words had no value anymore, that my voice didn't matter, that I was just a burden to be tolerated. That's what was killing me." Renata nodded, understanding. "And now I know I am heard, that my voice still echoes, that I still have something to say, something to contribute, and that, my dear, is worth more than any lost youth." Robert, who had heard everything, felt a wave of love and respect for this extraordinary woman who was his mother. He approached and hugged her from behind. "I love you, Mum." Mrs. Eleanor placed her, hands over his. "I love you too, son, more than any words can say." And there in that simple garden filled with life, under the warm spring sun, surrounded by flowers she herself had planted and cared for, they stood, mother and son, united not just by blood, but by true love, by respect, by everything they had overcome together. Life wasn't perfect. There were still challenges, still difficult days, but now they faced everything together, and that made all the difference. Mrs. Eleanor went back to watering her flowers, the sun illuminating her white hair, a serene smile on her face. And in that moment, she was the very image of peace. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Robert and Eleanor has deeply touched your hearts. If you are moved by this journey of overcoming, of a son's love and of justice, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what part of this story resonated with you the most. Every day we bring you intense stories like this one, revealing the deepest side of the human soul, making us reflect on the value of family and dignity. We'll see you in the next episode, where another emotional story will be told.